let's bust this myth a bit, Matty. Like, what are your comments on that?
Yeah. So listen, I think if there was a perfect sensitivity, it's a holy grail that we're never gonna find. And say we have like everyone in the world. Okay, let's agree on this sensitivity. This is what's best for all kinds of aiming. But then what do you say when you have this one player who's like really good and he's running just completely different? It's always going to be subjective, and then you just have to find and feel out what you prefer to use on a per scenario basis per game. And you should often like I change sensitivity like per scenario, sometimes even per run now. Like if I'm feeling something's like weird, or if I want to make use of more mobility, I'll go to a higher sense. That's the kind of like mindset you need to have with sensitivity. There's no one value that's just gonna make you like insane or a god aimer. Like, and it's one of those settings that many people like overthink. The amount of times that I would see someone using the exclamation mark sends command in my Twitch chat is through the roof, and I think I should have a counter for it. So it's one of those things where it's like we're not gonna find like the perfect sensitivity, and even the sensitivity that I run, like generally I run 46 cm for dynamic scenarios. Like even if you copy that, you're not gonna get, without my technique and without the right approach, you're not gonna get my scores in dynamic. So it's just something that you have to feel on your own, and it's something that you should feel free to experiment and change around. And as we've discussed before, there's no harm to it. Like you're not going to suddenly lose your ability to play at 25 cm if you played on it your whole life and you suddenly switch to 35 cm. It's not, when we use muscle memory, when we use that term, it's not, we use it the wrong way when we describe it in aiming and when describing mouse sensitivity. So it's just something we can't overthink anymore.
So are you able to just, I know that people will have a question about that because this is one of those things that does break people's brain a little bit. Can you describe the misunderstanding there with muscle memory?
I think with muscle memory, we tend to make the distinction that it's related to familiarity, and say if we just jump on something unfamiliar for a while, we'll just suddenly lose our ability. But the thing is, like, we have a lot of capacity to learn and adapt. So when we're on something new or something feels different, we adapt very, very quickly. And the more you try to like change it around and play with sensitivity, the more you realize that, oh, I can just go from 50 cm to 25 cm, and then within like a run or two, it's just gonna feel instantly the same, or I'll just perform the same way, because you just get used to the idea of change, and you get used to adapting. And I think that when people use muscle memory, I think it's more so for like sequences of things. So say you have like a habit, or let's relate this to in-game stuff. So in Overwatch, you'll have Tracer. So a technique that people like to do with Tracer is they'll do a blink, and then they'll throw the ultimate ability, the pulse bomb. They'll blink and pulse bomb, and there's a way to do it so that it's like seamless. That is muscle memory. Knowing how to do that seamlessly, to blink and throw the pulse bomb at the same time at the end of the blink, that is muscle memory. And knowing the sequence of like keys, that's part of what we describe the term as. But when we talk about skills and skill sets and knowing how to do things that are not really a sequence, that are more just like mechanical, like aiming, that's not really where muscle memory I think applies, because we can adapt, we can change our technique, and we can control different levels of aiming.
Yeah, I've noticed that too with myself, being able to like switch between, make really big switches, and the adaptability is really interesting. The technique is pretty important. That's the important thing for sure. So, and what's related to this as well, I think, is also the the myth that you must stick to one sensitivity as well. And so I think you've kind of covered that essentially, so we don't necessarily have to go over that unless there's anything additional you think that's worth pointing out with that.
Nah, I don't really think there's much into it. I think that many people just overthink it way too much, and honestly, if if people overthought it less, they would probably find some more breakthroughs in their aim than they would initially believe.
Okay, so this next one then is also it's a similar type of thing, and I think what we're trying to do here as well with some busting some of these myths is we're effectively also trying to help all of you guys who are listening to know where you should focus your attention and also hopefully your wallets as well, because I think like buying loads of different stuff and trying out loads of different stuff, looking for the perfect mouse is an affliction that many of us have, and it is fun to experiment, but I think a lot of us might. The negative aspect is we might be playing on something and be like, oh, this, I need if I had a different mouse, I would be a better player. And so you start to think that your mouse is your problem. So, what would you respond in terms of there is a perfect mouse, or to players that are experiencing something like that?
Well, actually, I have like a perfect mouse for me because it's the G Pro X, the G Pro Superlight, and kind of the G Pro 2. I'm not really too much of a fan of the buttons, but it still works because the shape is just perfect for me. And I think that with a mouse, it's a little bit different because you can't go switching around your mouse the same way as sensitivity, because some shapes, just due to the like differences in our hands and hand sizes and the way that a mouse like molds into your hand, it will differ for a lot of different mice. And I do think that the distinction there is I have several types of the same mouse with different skates, and that's what that's the setup that I kind of have for myself. But I think that if you're switching like the shape that you're normally used to a completely different shape, I don't think that's going to give as much benefit as is expected. I think you should stick to around the same shapes, around the same mouse design generally, and just have different iterations of that, or different parts of your setup where it's the same mouse but different skates or different buttons or changing little things.
Yeah, and it's I guess like the answer is probably that maybe you need to assess your mouse, your technique. Maybe there's something missing there instead. That was something that I kept running into. That I would actually try different mice, and I would try like the GPX or something, and I was someone that's like a fingertip player, got smaller hands, and I'm like, oh, I just can't possibly use this mouse. But then when I learned to use my arm, I was like, oh, I can use this mouse. The issue for me was because I needed more range of motion in my fingertips, because that's what I was used to. But when I actually had the arm technique down a bit more, I was like, oh, I can actually use this mouse now because I can do all this stuff with my arm. I don't need as much range with my fingertips now, so I'm okay that it fills my hand a bit more. So that was like an interesting thing that, I mean, it's kind of dangerous because I was like, oh, I can use all these different shapes now. But
I think the deal with mice is that it's way, way more geared towards comfort and feeling it out. Like, it's not like sensitivity where it's kind of abstract and you're not actually feeling it in your hand. So, and there's even like wrist health risks that would come from forcing yourself to use some sort of different grip or mouse shape. So I think that it's a little bit different there. You can't just go around switching a million shapes.
yeah, that totally makes sense to me. I guess another, by extension thing that we can discuss is the idea about mouse grips and there being like a perfect mouse grip, because this is also kind of a big deal. People will see pros like Donk, for example, has this mouse grip that I think to people a long time ago would be more novel, but I've seen it. I think Zaiwu I saw was one of the first people I saw, where essentially the mouse, your mouse, with your mouse hand, you'll have your palm actually not resting on the mouse pad, like the back of your palm, but instead it will be actually on top of the mouse. And so this was a grip that he started to use. I even saw it a long time ago when Zaiwu was crushing everyone. Tens was like, I'm gonna practice with Zaiwu's grip for for a few games, and so I think the grip can be something like the sensitivity, that people feel like there is a perfect sensitivity for me, there's a perfect grip for me, and they can get in their heads about the mouse grip. So with mouse grip, how much should people be really thinking about it?
I think, okay, well, I get so many questions about mouse grip, and it's honestly like, it's getting a little annoying because so many people overthink it as much as they overthought sensitivity. And I just think that it works pretty much the same way, although like I don't really support the idea that you should be trying to adopt the grip of another player, especially if what you're working with is working for you. like they have a certain preference that's been built up with like uh, many years of probably experimenting with different mice and different grips, and that's what they arrived to as their answer. So I don't think that it's smart to really just go around copying grips. And just like with sensitivity, I think having different grips or being able to even shift between different grips in the middle of aiming can be beneficial. Because that's what I've been trying to kind of incorporate in some of my scenarios, where some scenarios I'll play with like a more pronounced claw grip. And in fact, there's this kind of grip that's been popularized by the Twitter and meme aim community. Clover, tracking player, he actually like bends his middle finger backwards, and it's called pivot maxing, and it's this whole thing. But the thing is, that's his natural grip, and I'm just like, oh, that's cool. So really what I've been doing is just, shifting in between that grip and my natural grip and just seeing how it feels, just for experimentation purposes. And I just think people need to treat it the same way as sensitivity, or similar to sensitivity. But they shouldn't look at a pro player and say, oh, he's using this really drastic claw grip, therefore I should do that too. No, that's not how it should be looked at, because you're probably going to end up making it really uncomfortable for yourself and hurting yourself in the long run. It's even to the point of like wrist health stuff.
It's funny. I think it was Mini where I asked him about the grip or something like that, and because again, like when you're trying to improve your aim, like really, like you don't know some of these things, and he was like, okay, so okay, go put your hand on the mouse. And I was like, okay, I've done that. And he's like, okay, there's your grip.
There it is. That's what I always say too.
And it's funny actually. It reminded me of this similar experience I had, where I've had like surgery on either shoulder, and so it kind of like really messed up a lot of my squatting mechanics. And I was seeing this physiotherapist, and I was like trying to like fix my squatting, and he's like, okay, I want you to just jump as high as you can, and I did it, and he's like, okay, that's how you squat. I was like, oh, okay, because you're so easy to overthink things, but your body kind of just knows what to do a lot of the time. So I found it interesting, you talking about, again, just experimenting with like having different groups based on sort of like what you're doing, and that, again, it makes sense to me based on some of the training I've done, where like you break everything down, you can decide that if I change like this bit of tension here at this point of the movement, that's not any different than, oh, if I change my grip here for this type of movement. And I love that's the process with trying to optimize your aiming in these trainers. Okay, well, so the next one is DPI, and I think this is a bit of a interesting one, because in Counter-Strike a lot of people copied each other, and it's kind of funny. It's like this generational thing where obviously the OG players obviously use low DPIs because that's all you had. But is there really any difference in using any particular DPI these days? Like what is the important DPIs to actually use, or does it matter even?
I think the consensus really is that 400 DPI was kind of the standard for CS, if I recall correctly, but people have realized that maybe 400 DPI, there's some technical issues, like because of how low it is, it can sometimes cause like pixel skipping or whatever it's called. Maybe you feel a little bit more lag, but that's so, in my opinion, that's just so detailed, so granular, that you'll have to like really pay attention to it, or like use some kind of software to make sure that it's there. I just don't think that matters. I don't think, if you want to run 400 DPI, go for it. I run like 800. If you want to run like 3200 DPI, go for it. I don't think it matters that much, because it's not the thing that's going to suddenly take you from like an intermediate aiming level to an advanced aiming level. I've always run 800 DPI, and I think here's the big indicator of what DPI you want to run is how like fast your mouse wants to move in the Windows desktop.
Yeah.
So, or if you play like a lot of games that just don't have like a wide sensitivity scale, like a lot of older games don't really have that. And if you want to like enjoy those at a normal DPI without switching it, you just play it like faster if they don't have like the fastest option.
That makes sense. Do you have any opinion on like mouse hertz and stuff? Because obviously this is like a one way. Companies will try to say, our
Mm.
new mouse is super sick. It can go at like a higher hertz than any other mouse. It's therefore better.
This there's a lot of people who say, especially in the gaming community, there's a lot of people who say that like, oh, if it's not 4K hertz plus, I can't play with it. Like I immediately see it and I can't play with it. I personally am not one of those people. I can't really tell the difference between 1K hertz and 4K hertz. Like I know that there are people who can do it with a blind test over and over and over again. I know Viscos can, but I can't. And I think that the main reason is just like, again, I don't really care that much if it's not going to be the main thing that boosts my scores. Like I'm sure if I ran 4K hertz for like a long, long time and just got used to it, I would be able to tell the difference switching between 1K and 4K. But again, and I think Clover agrees with me with this on as well, it's not going to be the factor that turns you into a good aimer. Everything, everyone tries to obsess over these settings and these like marketing techniques, as you called it. But I think the main thing is just technique and everything that we've been talking about so far with what you should be paying attention to in aiming.
One at a time, we're kind of just like getting rid of people's excuses,
Mm.
I have a challenge for you, actually. This might be a funny challenge. I would be really interested to see you play with a ball mouse. You can have like 1,000 hertz polling rate, but I'd be really curious, like how, like if you could get celestial scores with a ball mouse, because again, I'm sure you've probably never used a ball mouse, but
Probably have not.
but it was pre 2004, I guess, like pretty common. There were some like the Razer Boom Slang was like the first like a laser mouse, and that came out in the year 2000. But the optical mice didn't really start coming into kind of like common usage with gamers until like maybe like 2004, 5 was like the era, I would say. And the like the ability for aiming on some of these like ball mice and so on like back then was honestly pretty awesome. And I think it's interesting because people obsess so much about equipment. I think they just don't understand like that it's really not that important. So I thought it might be a fun challenge. I don't know, like a fun stream you could do one day. I don't know.
I mean, if I don't do that, I think I have like an Overwatch teammate. I do collegiate Overwatch as well. He's like you aimer guys. Constantly you guys talk about your artisan mouse pads or $100 mice and stuff. I dare you to try and hit a world record on a $10 max budget setup. Mousepad and mouse. So I gotta take that up at some point.
That'd be pretty awesome. That you mean again, like you're kind of like fucking with the the whole like all like these marketing schemes and like
Yep.
yeah. So that'd be kind of interesting. The same thing, we kind of wrecked all of the videos a little bit of like this is how you find your perfect sensitivity. It's like there's a lot of videos like that out there. And I guess like the last one, because it's common, I guess we might as well also touch on it, is resolution. This is also a thing in CS that people have obsessed with a lot. And I think
Rainbow
there are
Six.
some practical ideas here, but I do still think I agree with your general theme that it's a drop in the bucket of what's important.
Yeah, I see a lot of aim trainers actually running like stretch res, and I'm like, no, that's kind of like that's probably not good because it's gonna mess with the bot hitboxes depending on like or your perception of the map. I think that for most aim trainers, you just want to run native, just so that you don't mess up your perception of things. Some people want to like blend it with their CS aim, by going to a stretch resolution. That's what we're talking about, right? Like stretching, or like render scale size, aspect
Yeah.
ratio.
Yeah.
I think that for games like CS, I know that there is a distinct advantage in being able to see the enemy faster, but if you don't really want to do that, it's like it's not going to hurt you that much. I know that CS has that advantage, and I know that maybe Valorant does as well. I know R6 does definitely have that advantage as well, but it's not going to be the difference maker, and you shouldn't. I don't think you should try to run it at aim trainers so that it doesn't mess up your perception of things. And it's not going to make an intermediate score into a like top 50, top 10 score. So,
All
same
right.
idea.
There we go. Okay, we can move on from some of this stuff that I know that we've talked a lot about in the past. So I am curious though. I've been thinking a lot about. Well, I had been thinking a lot about mouse pads, and it's not something like friction is not something that's talked about a lot. And I think once I started to think about the arm tension aspect, and also how that also relates to a mouse weight and how it relates to the amount of friction and the sensitivity, all these different things, they all actually contribute a lot to what types of aiming might be more difficult or less difficult. So I can give an example. I discovered that I cannot, for example, use a higher friction surface with a fast sensitivity and a very light mouse and be able to go from, let's say I'm holding an angle in in Valorant or something, holding an angle, someone's going to peek, and they'll do a tiny, it'll be like a small peek, like maybe a jiggle or something, or like even like a swing of any degree. If I am to go from, like, the static friction is so high and the weight of the mouse is so low, it requires, like, I can easily mess that up. I don't feel like I have control in that movement. And so a solution I found was that there was either two solutions there for me to go to. One, I make my sensitivity a lot slower, or I reduce the friction of the mouse pad. And those are the two ways I can have control in that kind of micro correction situation. So I started to think more about pads when I started to realize that there is a practical difference, not just, oh, this feels more fun. So I'm curious about your considerations when thinking about choosing a mouse pad.
So I think that among all the things that we talked about, this is probably the most important one for aiming here. So this is probably what a lot of people were surprised about and entertained by when I switched mice and mouse pads at the Rebel Ready check. So it's not just mouse pads. I would like to introduce like skates into the question too.
Yeah.
Mouse skates. I think that you need to look at like your aiming style and the kind of games that you're playing and what situations that you're running into. So what you're kind of describing in TAC FPS is those people peeking into you from an angle, and that's going to require like a lot of focus on micros and just stopping power, which is why a lot of players tend to use some of the slower pads, the higher friction pads. But I think that you need to recognize where your strengths are in terms of aiming, whether like you like the feeling of high speed and you like the feeling of like free movement. Because I know that EliGE is actually running the Florescent Ninja, which is close to the Raiden mid speed, which is really high speed. And he's a TAC FPS player, so it's likely for a good reason because of the freedom of motion.
He is at 34 cm as well, unless he's changed
Yep.
it, I think.
He's still around that point. And I think that he's examined how his aim is and how easy it is to like maybe perform micros on that kind of pad for him. So I think that there should always be options. You could raise your sensitivity. That is one thing. But I like the idea of maybe having a different or the same mouse but with different skates. That's exactly what I kind of did at the Rebel Ready check. I had two G Pro X's, and one of them had skates that were more worn in than the other. Same thing with the mouse pads. I had two Raiden mids, and this was what threw so many people off. It's the same hardness mouse pad. Why is he switching it? One is more worn in than the other. So it was like 6 months of usage on one, and the other one was just fresh. Like I got it like 2 weeks before.
Okay. Yeah. So so you determine what you need to use based on sort of like just the task at hand, essentially.
Right, and the feel that you're kind of expecting out of it. Like
Okay.
if you're feeling like your mouse is like dragging as a result of the friction, you can't react to the peak properly, then maybe a faster pad is going to work. Because if you feel like your motion is being hindered by it, or opposite end, if you feel like your motion is way overpronounced, then maybe a slower pad works. Same idea.
Yeah, it's actually, I have to say there are some considerations here that people don't think about, especially if you play at lands, because when you're in different environments, there can be different degrees of humidity as well. And so if you're in an environment like last year, I was at the lock-in event with 100 Thieves and we're playing there, and the humidity was crazy. It was in Brazil, it was like super hot in there, and everyone's getting really sweaty, and so the friction is going to be impacted because it's the cloth pads that a lot of people are playing on, and so it's going to absorb some of that moisture, and it's gonna have a different feel because of that. And so those things definitely, like, if you're a professional player, like, you will notice it feeling different for sure.
Even the skypad tends to become a little sticky in humidity. Uh, and there's also like a lot of factors why you wouldn't want to bring like a skypad, because generally it's hard to travel with a giant glass mouse pad. But um, besides that, related to directly aiming, I think with your motions being a little bit more pronounced when you're stressed and adrenaline is peaking at a LAN tournament, maybe not the best idea. You might want to find like a similar speed, like high speed pad that is cloth, and you're able to like manage it a little bit better.
Yeah,
Just my opinion, though.
yeah, I definitely share that opinion. I actually took a small skypad, like the small version, to when I went to do a Ludwig event recently. I was in LA and I like traveled with it, and it was just too. It was actually just too small though. That was the problem, and I wouldn't be able to reasonably, I feel like, take the bigger one unless I was really committed. Unless I was like really committed to it and had a pretty, the whole travel setup was oriented that I could like pack it quite specifically. Like that would just, that's a lot of stress that I don't need.
Right.
And no one really uses. It's very rare that people are. There's not going to be like, oh, I can just borrow somebody else's skypad. That's like not going to happen probably for an event if yours breaks or something like that. And I think you should always probably have some spares if you're going to be traveling as a pro player for LAN. So I completely agree with what you said there. Now I'm having to think of if I should find another pad. Speaking of which, Skypad, I know that you did a review. I didn't actually get to check it out yet. What's your opinion on Skypad? Because it's picking up in popularity.
Everyone is saying that the Skypad 4.0, or at least the people that tried it, is a big upgrade from the 3.0.
Oh, wow.
And I think that it's not necessarily higher speed. Depends on the unit. But I'd say it's a lot more smooth and consistent, which I like. And it's actually made me want to maybe switch to the Skypad 4.0 from the Raiden. But, it's those considerations, as we're saying, like, it can vary. It's still not as consistent as maybe a cloth pad, but the speed is there, and it's great. The 4.0 is great.
Yeah, and it's really interesting when you mess with these pads. I remember I want to find the fastest pad I can, and I remember trying those Glorious have like an ice pad or something like that, and it's basically like a hybridized glass pad, and it's faster than the Sky pad, but there's no control. You cannot stop the mouse with that thing. So that was like really a big problem. I'm like, I actually just cannot aim with this. I love how fast it is, but man, I can't aim. And I was surprised with the Sky pad. It actually has a lot of control. Actually, you can like a decent amount of stopping power. That's it's really impressive what they've done with it. Are there, there are there's so much hardware on the market these days, and so many companies that have innovated in the space. Obviously, the GPX is by far the most popular mouse, and I feel like at this point, you're not going to necessarily find sensors that are going to make the difference. It seems like it's all about the shape. Is the GPX overhyped in any sense? Because I believe it's at most events at least over 50-60% of usage in pro players. It's by far the most popular.
I mean, it's my favorite mouse, so I'd say like probably is a little bit overhyped. I think obviously, as you said, most important thing is shape with most things. I think it could be improved more. Like obviously they just recently ruled out the 4K polling rate on the G Pro 2, and the next big upgrade I'd say is getting the weight down from 60 to like 50 grams. Like that's one thing that I was a little bit disappointed about, because I wanted to try out like a really light mouse when it came out, and the fact that they only took like 1-2 grams off of it is a little not too good. So
Got it.
It can be improved, and I think that there's room for changes in the future and customization even.
Okay, well, I think it'd be great if we talk a little bit about EliGE, because you got to work a lot with him. You released that report. And again, that's another thing I'll link below.
Mm.
Yeah, Matty, sort of, in working with EliGE and the Get Amped program, which is a program that Voltaic have specifically for coaching pro players, released a report that kind of goes through EliGE's sort of process, where he was on various tasks, what his goals were to improve, some of the thinking behind, where the mistakes are, or what they're trying to, or what the solutions are that are being executed. Then you get to see the kind of like the before and after of EliGE kind of as he goes through these processes with Matty, and it's really cool to see because the improvements were very clear indeed, and that's what was really amazing about it. It was just the level of transparency behind. I mean, EliGE was already like an incredibly good aimer, and so to see so much improvement be so visible was really exciting. So how is it to work with EliGE firstly? Because he's an incredible professional.
EliGE is EliGE is insane to work with. He is so hungry for improvement and advantages, and I think that really just defines like what we really want to see in our clients and even in our own players. Like just constantly being analytical about things and looking for any edge that they can get. Um, and I think that's something you mentioned in your video on the document. That EliGE is that kind of player who is just committed to constantly trying to find those strengths. And initially, it was quite admittedly difficult because EliGE is already such a good aim trainer. Like his Voltaic rank in the benchmarks is like Grandmaster complete. So there's a lot of things where you have to dig really deep just to find errors to look at or isolate things. And it's come to the point like he's renewed the program now, and we're looking for the more minor things that will cause us to lose fights and lose duels. And it's kind of moved away from the initial major things that I pointed out in the original document. But it's been really good lately. And working with him is definitely really fun, and I'm learning a lot just from the kind of player that he is.
Yeah, that was my next question. Is what have you learned, if anything, from EliGE? Because he is a wealth of knowledge, one of the most dedicated professionals I've ever come across, and so I can imagine it must be quite an experience getting to kind of see him in his process.
I think again, it's mostly just in-game things that I didn't really know about, like a lot that goes into CS strategy. Um, a lot that would influence like how you want to be aiming in CS, the timings and things and setups for opponents and how that influences where you're going. And I just think that as an Overwatch player, as someone who doesn't really come too much into tech FPS, I've learned a lot about how CS performs and how and what you're expected to do at the highest level of CS esports.
So if I don't know if you can really put a percentage on this or how you could discuss it, but what is the, and obviously it's visible with, like we were talking about with the report, but what's your sense of the improvements EliGE has made with his aim? And maybe it's something that he's described to you, or something that you have seen. Like, is it a huge improvement? Is it the floor that's improved? How would you describe how EliGE's aim has improved whilst working with you?
Well, in the first iteration, the second iteration is going on now. I think we've gone back and forth with like micros and improving our consistency with micros. So our skill floor has definitely been raised a whole lot with EliGE. And I think the major issue that we identified in the last document, which was the drastic flicks or over flicking, where we would be holding an angle, someone would peek out at us, and we would try to adjust onto that enemy, but we would risk over flicking. I think, as far as I've seen from the VODs that I've seen, that issue is kind of just eliminated. Like, I'm not seeing that anymore from him, which is one of the big improvements and was the highlight of the last program. And it's just, we're just seeing more confidence, more consistent aiming overall, and we're willing to take those fights because we know that speed is EliGE's main strength, and we're just more willing to be aggressive and leverage our aim in these fights. It's really good improvement all across the board, and I think that less and less I'm seeing more issues that I can't really address due to game sense. But any of the aim issues that I used to see is like it's not really there anymore. I'm just seeing constant, uh, with reference like a game, gameplay.
Awesome. Is it is it like really? I imagine you must catch some of his matches. How is it like satisfying just to see him just destroy people? Having
I
to like
did
help them out.
watch. I did watch that one match or that one series where he was like I think he was like MVP or the highest rated like
Mm.
rifler in the competition, or it's like he had to show the most improvement, and I'm like I'm really happy. Like that's really the most fulfilling thing and why I like coaching so much. Even more so than just generally pushing scores. Like anyone can push scores, but uh, again, coaching is the one thing that like it's so rewarding, and you're able to actually have this impact in uh, really large scale events and things like that for these players who are just motivated on a new level to perform like that. Uh, so it's definitely satisfying. It's definitely rewarding, and I love to see EliGE improve. I've always been a fan of EliGE for the time that I've been looking at CS esports. So it's crazy to see that I'm having an impact on that performance in some little way.
Yeah, it's really cool, man. It's so cool that you've managed to transfer your knowledge into that impact on the server with a pro like him. Um, what motivated you to release the program, the report to the public? Because I feel like that's like again, it's so. I feel like it's still not appreciated enough, and that if people are watching this, you have to go check it out. And again, the link will be there. That transparency, like no one really does that. So what motivated you to share that with everybody? And I'm sure he had to sign off on it.
Yeah, I asked him for the permission to do that, and I think that the main thing was I consider my work with EliGE in that in those first 8 weeks that I did with him, like that's so far my best work in coaching, and I think uh, my analysis of him was just like I don't think there's anything I've done so far that is as good as that and as deep as that because he's such a good player, and I had to be really detailed about it. So I wanted to get that out there both because I knew that players in CS could learn from it, and I knew that people who knew EliGE was good, but they wanted that extra detail. Like they can learn from it as well now, and they have those resources, the before and after. And it's also the fact that um, some people like to criticize Amped for being like gatekeeping aim and just uh, only being like locked to pros or whatnot. But I just say like we don't gatekeep. Like here's the results of what we do, and there's the proof that it is working. So I don't know. I just wanted to dispute it, those criticisms a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, those criticisms don't seem rational at all, really, because this really is the proof of concept. If this is valuable to someone that is already as good as EliGE was upon entering the first 8 weeks, then it's the best proof of concept that you can have that this not only works but it is valuable, and also equally you have these pros who will then be ambassadors, and they are a better legitimizer of what you're doing than anybody else because they've experienced it and are getting the results. So all of those factors combined, I feel like is very powerful for moving the ball forward for the aiming community. So those detractors need to shut up because it makes no sense.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Interesting. I'm curious if there's other pros that you've seen, whether it can be in any game that you've been like, oh wow, like stunned by their aiming performance. Because there's a lot of aimers out there that definitely have their own styles, and you're surrounded by all of these incredible aimers in the Voltaic community and other aiming communities. But are there any pros that you've seen that you're like, whoa, this guy's pretty next level?
Well, obviously everyone was just stunned by Donk in CS. I don't really understand how he's able to just hit every first initial shot. Like I kind of wish I played CS like him, um, as we all do. But I've looked a lot into Donk's aiming, um, because I wanted to just try and incorporate some things into my aim coaching and see what I could recommend. And a lot of his strengths is just setting up shots, crosshair placement. It's just all the usual things, but he just does it at a level that is so much better than every other pro that he faces. So hit Donk's aim, but number one. And another TAC FPS player, SR Florescent.
Oh
You
yeah.
remember the their win Game Changers, whatever it's called, VCT Game Changers?
Yes, yeah, in Brazil.
I think I wasn't really impressed by anyone's Valorant aim until I saw a clip from Florescent. I don't. She is just on another level. I don't understand.
Yeah, she's insane.
Like, I come from Overwatch, so it's like some things in Overwatch you'll never see in TAC FPS. People flying through the air and being able, and you're forced to like shoot them through the air, and it's constantly happening. You don't see that in Valorant, and I've watched a lot of Valorant pros, and yeah, I'm not seeing it. Florescent, there's a jet that uses updraft and just dashed through the air. Florescent perfectly tracked that arc through the air and headshot the jet mid-air in like the fastest flick I've seen in Valorant, and I'm just like, wait a minute, that's just Overwatch.
Yeah.
So
insane.
How
Insane.
in attack FPS?
Yes, TAC FPS players don't aim like that. Like that, I totally get like why you're. Yeah, I totally get that. Yeah, the floor's incredible. I almost had her on the pods a while ago. I'd love to kind of sort of get in the minds a little bit, because it is really just doesn't look like. I totally agree. It doesn't look like it like fits in the game. So I love that shout out. That's a great one. That's a really great one. And
she's also an aim trainer. She's also hit Nova clicking scores in the Voltaic benchmarks and Kovacs. So big shout out, in fact.
Yeah, it's definitely, again, it's like Minnie said, like it's so easy, I think, to say, oh, this person's just really talented, they're really gifted. But yes, there is an element of that, but I think that some people are certainly more gifted in the analytical aspect, sure, but it is available to everybody to be able to make like mega improvements. And I think Floor is an example of someone that like used these tools really well, like really well. So super impressive. Any other shout outs? This is fun.
Coming to mind, not really too sure.
Yeah,
those are the main pros that come to mind.
I think if I was gonna throw one out there, I would maybe say something from such a funny name from Valorant from Paper X. Like, he's just also really high sense player actually, and I think extremely wrist and fingertip dominant. So it's kind of unusual for attack FPS player, but extremely consistent and amazing first bullet accuracy despite such a crazy fast Sens. So I didn't expect that was possible, that we would see that. So shout out to something as well. So with that said, is there a game that you feel like, is Overwatch still like the best game for like a test of raw aim to an extent?
I would say not so much anymore now that the finals came out. Have you played that?
Yeah, I love the finals. I wish that they did more of the esports component of it, but I think the game's really fun.
I think they recently, in the season 2, they added the private matches, so they're actually working towards it.
Nice.
And I think that the finals, if I were to switch to any game, it would be the finals, not Overwatch anymore, because Overwatch has a lot of things in the background that I just like, the game sense aspects of that game, the role switching, and it's not fun. I don't find it fun. So, like, I main Overwatch, but I would obviously just main the finals, because I haven't really seen more aim translation in any other game besides the finals. Like,
yeah,
there's constant transfer for all kinds of tracking, and in clicking, there's the revolver, there's the sniper, there's just constant aiming in that game, and it's just so fun. Like, I don't think that there's the same kind of translation in Overwatch.
Yeah, I love the verticality too, and just the dynamic environments means that you have to be able to be really reactive and constantly thinking.
Oh yeah,
and I love that about the game. I think it's really, really, really fun. I hope that they kind of recover the esports scene and kind of really propel it forward, because it would be so sick to see that game.
Yeah, and it, like, because of the destructive environments, it creates almost like several different scenarios in one. So you're not just in Overwatch, say you queue like Soldier, the kind of aiming that you're doing against the team, it doesn't really change that much unless they're switching and they're playing different angles. But in the finals, the angle that you're looking at and the angles that you have to aim at are changing constantly every single time something else explodes. So that's part of the fun and part of why aim transfers so well.
Makes sense. Yeah, I'm all about it. I can't wait to get back into it. I hope it gets a bit better optimized too, because it can be it's
Yeah,
hard to get the FPS going. But
I still run around like 144, unfortunately.
mm,
But maybe in the future, near future, when the game like full focuses like esports and they have like more modes, more maps, better optimization, I get a new PC and I just roll.
yeah, 100%. I'm excited now. I completely forgot about the finals because it had that like really great release, and then it kind of slowed down a lot, and there's a
It's
lot of
stabilizing.
issues. And now it's coming back. That is what you're saying. So that's really great to hear because I had no idea about that. It's just awesome. Um, okay, with that said, of all of the sort of aim theory that you've looked at, of course, I feel like that's really what your unraveling the secrets of aim videos are about. Like we discussed at the beginning of the podcast, you've been kind of focusing in those videos on sort of different, like, sections, players that really focus and excel at one area in particular. What about Matty? If if you were to do like the unraveling the secrets of aim with Matty, what would you focus on in terms of what makes you an amazing aim trainer player?
That's a tough question, actually. Like, I don't really think about doing it myself because I wanted to highlight other people that are the foundations. But if I were to do like me, I'm an all-rounder, so I would kind of the bleed over with other categories would be insane. So I guess I would mainly focus it on dynamic clicking because I do think that like passive and dynamic clicking is kind of the most valuable category that has the most bleed over to other categories. I think that I would try to focus on blending techniques, peripheral awareness. I think that what people commonly tell me is that I'm the best at intercepting targets and being able to watch other targets while I'm looking at one. So I think that would define my video on myself if I were to do an aim secrets video on Matty OW dynamic, Matty OW multi-target situations.
Awesome. All right. Well, someone's got to do it. You're doing all these videos for everyone else. I love that you're doing like being a custodian in a sense of the history and honoring, all of the people that have contributed to the overall level in the scene. It's really awesome to see. Is there of all of the videos that you've done, what have you sort of enjoyed the most? What kind of what kind of part of aim theory excites you the most?
I think again, Snowy's aim is just on another level with smoothness, and I think a couple of my friends said that fundamentally Snowy's technique is perfect and the kind of aim that everyone should just strive to get. Uh, and if it were executed like 100% of the time consistent, like it would just be aimbot, or the closest to aimbot that we can get. So Snowy's aim, easily the biggest technique that I would like to emulate in my own aim. Uh, Close second, I guess, is MBM's method, just because it's like very fast and reactive, but not anywhere close. I'd say to my own like level of aiming.
All right. Well, we should definitely begin to wrap this one up. Before we do a little wrap on the plugs and everything, do you have any advice for the young aimers out there that are trying to get into all of this? What would you say to people looking to do that?
Like advice to just anyone who's looking at aim training but just still skeptical about it.
Advice of people that are either skeptical or don't see the value, or people that are they want to improve their aim. What must they do? What must they aspire to accomplish to get to the mechanics of their dreams?
I just think that first they need to just get started on the aim trainer. They need to just jump in because uh like obviously there's that nervousness that like, oh, is this gonna work or is this not gonna work? Is this gonna be a waste of time? I've dumped like this has been like 3 years now. into this, and I could tell you, it's just the amount of value that people are missing when they say, "Oh, aim training doesn't work," or "It didn't work for me in my 50 hours of playing it." It's you are missing out, like on the mechanical improvement, and especially if you consider yourself like more analytical of yourself, and you're really looking for that edge. Like aim training is the answer if you're an FPS player, and especially in the more aim-oriented games. Um, especially right now when aim training is really picking up in popularity rapidly. Uh, there's still a lot of people who just don't believe in it. And I see it a lot in Overwatch. The people like criticize me in Overwatch constantly, saying like, "Oh, you're an aim trainer. Stick to aim training." But they're not realizing that that's probably the edge that's going to push them to hit the next rank or um, win half of the fights that they're losing. Like the one back when I first started aim training, I did like Overwatch custom games, and I just did everything that I could think of to get better aim. And I was like, what, hard stuck, diamond, couldn't get into masters, felt like I wasn't moving at all in Overwatch. It wasn't until I started going deep into aim training and actually learning about techniques and stuff that I actually ranked up. Like that was the only point. So I'd say if you want to work on aim, just go into Kovacs, go into aim labs, find a routine, and do all of the analytical things that we've talked about today.
Awesome. Well, we've plugged a lot of your stuff already. I know you stream a bunch, so I'd love to give you a platform right at the end here to kind of let people know like where to find you, what you're up to, and all of that.
Uh, like it's just all of my links. Let's see. Actually, you could. I'm gonna give you something in the description for like a little doc bio thing that I made.
Sweet.
It's like about your coach, and I want to share that with everyone. It's also in my Discord bio. And if you guys want to catch me on stream playing Overwatch or doing aim VOD reviews, definitely check that out. It's twitch.tv/Matty_OW.
Awesome. Yeah, and you've got like an awesome Discord community too, like a really thriving, flourishing, like
It's the
lively
dot
community.
clicking club.
The dot clicking club, yeah. Awesome. Well, Matty, thank you so much for your time. You're an inspiration with everything that you've done and accomplished, and it's just amazing talking to you. So thank you so much.
Thank you.